All of that to come, but we are going to kick off with some news that has just been reaching us, some staggering pictures we're waking up to this morning. A house that's been destroyed by a suspected gas explosion in Birmingham. Let's find out more, should we? Becky's standing by for us. Hi, Becky, what happened?
Well, this house has been completely blown away. It was just after 8:30 last night when people for a few miles around here heard and felt an enormous explosion. Now, pictures show really quite dramatic scene where the house has disappeared. It was replaced almost instantly by burning rubble. Of course, a huge emergency response, and we've been hearing stories that neighbours on this street came out, saw that there was a seriously injured man in that burning rubble. Neighbours actually went in themselves and dragged him out. Now, we know that he's currently in hospital with what paramedics describe as life-threatening injuries. There is some concern because there was some talk on this street that there may also have been a woman in the house at the time. We know at least 4 other people were treated here at the scene by paramedics. Serious damage to the house, damage to cars as well, and also damage to surrounding houses. Now, in the cold light of day, I can actually show you where this house was standing. You can see the wall there. That's the semi-detached house that was attached to it. There should be a whole house there just completely demolished. We've seen the fire service here this morning still dampening down what's left of the rubble there, and also workers here from Cadent. It's thought that this was caused by a gas explosion, so people have been asked to avoid the area while emergency services continue their work, and of course thoughts with all those injured here.
OK, thanks, Becky. Thanks a lot. Oh, lucky guy this morning, isn't he? Joining us, the Environment Secretary, George Eustace. Hi.
Good morning.
Good to see you as always. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Start with cost of living, should we? Last time you were on, you were talking about people buying value brands from supermarkets in order to try to make ends meet a little bit easier. This morning, hearing from the Bank for International Settlements saying that we're on the tipping point of falling into a period of runaway inflation. What else can people at home do?
Well, look, we've got inflationary pressures right around the world, you know, in the United States, the European Union, and of course here in the UK as well. So the truth is that a lot of prices are covered by the gas price. And so when gas prices spike, we get a big increase in fertiliser costs, fuel costs, and that goes right through people's household bills. So there's a limit to what we can do until the gas price comes down. But we have announced a very, very big package of support now, £37 billion, giving £650 extra to the poorest households in this country, and an extra £300 a year to pensioners as well, to give them a boost to their incomes. We've increased the national living wage. So we've done a lot of measures to try to help mitigate the impact of this. But there's no doubt that when you get a surge in oil and gas prices, it is going to put pressure on household budgets.
PM suggested moving away from green fuels. That's a way forward. He is suggesting to tackle the cost of living crisis. Repurposing land currently used for crop-based biofuels to grow more food. Is that something that you support?
Yes, it is something that we are arguing for at the G7 this week. And that's because if you reduce the amount of particularly maize and wheat that is going into biofuels, which is used as part of the blends in petrol, when people see E10 on those petrol pumps, that suggests that up to 10% of the fuel could be a biofuel coming from those crops. If we could temporarily reduce the amount of biofuels going into the petrol pumps, that actually does bring back down the price of maize in particular quite significantly.
Washington thinks it's a terrible idea.
Well, Washington and the United States are heavily invested in biofuels, and they see that, therefore, as part of their fuel security. But what we'd be talking about here is a temporary reduction in order to stabilise world food prices and make sure that the poorer countries around the world can get access to the food that they need. So we think it's the right thing to do. But it is the case, of course, that the United States is a big player in biofuels, so we're going to have to work to try to get them on board.
Well, they're not going to, are they? In fact, they're trying to block any change that the Prime Minister might come up with at G7.
Well, it doesn't. We should still argue for the right thing, whether or not
They think they're arguing for the right thing as well.
Well, they disagree with it because they are thinking as well about their fuel supply, and they see this as a big part of that, and they're worried about what might happen to fuel at the fuel pumps. We think that's misplaced. We think that actually you could do this temporarily. It would temporarily increase the amount of wheat and maize on world markets, and would therefore bring food prices down. So we've done the analysis on this. We think it's the right thing to do. They've obviously got a slightly different view at the moment, but that's why you have these international dialogues to thrash out these differences and discuss it.
Yeah, but you can't persuade somebody about your point of view if you don't actually turn up for meetings that they're organising. The Prime Minister didn't go to a meeting that Biden was hosting.
Well, the Prime Minister is going to be at the meeting this week. There's a meeting happening at Bavaria, and then there's a NATO meeting later in the week in Spain as well. There's been a lot of international engagement. Obviously, he's coming from the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and I'm sure that if the Prime Minister wasn't there, there would have been somebody else attending that meeting in his place.
How are we going to get the grain out of Ukraine?
Well, this is a big challenge. There's probably around 25 million tonnes of grain, possibly more, that is currently stranded in stores around Odessa. And to put that into context, at any one time, we've got about 250 million tonnes of wheat in store around the world. And so, although it's a small proportion of the overall total, in the current context, it's quite significant. And unless we can get it out, there won't be stores for this year's harvest to go into. So we're looking at what we can do to help to repair railways, to look at a land bridge so that we can get that wheat out across a land border. It's now very, very perilous to try to get ships into the Black Sea and to take it out.
So we're ruling out the Navy being involved?
It's very difficult to do that because the area is mined, and in fact, Ukraine themselves have closed their ports for security reasons. And so there's a whole host of reasons why it's difficult to get shipping into the Black Sea and to take that wheat out of Odessa. But we are looking at what we can do to support them to make sure they can get it out. And the other, very sad thing that we're seeing is that Russia, it appears, are stealing some wheat from those stores. And so what the UK government is doing is making available the technology that we've got to be able to test the provenance of wheat. We're working with other countries, including Australia, on this, so that we can ensure that stolen Ukrainian wheat does not find a route to market.
OK, how do we do that?
You can test the DNA of the grain, and we've got samples of Ukrainian grain. We did a lot of work on this. You might remember the horse meat scandal about a decade ago. The UK is a world leader in being able to test the provenance. That's the precise region in which a crop was grown through a testing of DNA. And that's what we've made available. We're putting on the table £1.5 million to support that work. OK. Are we inviting President Zelensky to address Parliament? I haven't heard that, but obviously he's addressed Parliament before.
No, actually to come along and do that.
Well, I'm sure that he would be welcome to. I haven't heard plans for that. Obviously, that's something that the Speaker of the House would lead on that type of...
So that's just the Prime Minister flying a kite at the moment, then?
Well, look, Zelensky has already spoken to Parliament before.
Yeah, we saw.
He addressed it virtually. I'm sure that President Zelensky, at the moment, has got quite a lot on his plate dealing with the current situation in Ukraine. But, of course, I'm sure that he'd be welcome to come and address our Parliament. I'm sure that the Speaker of the House would accommodate that if that were the right thing to do. But it's very early to be considering that at the moment.
But I'm guessing you are talking to him about how a land bridge would work to try and get this grain out.
We are working with, Ukraine on what it would take to ensure that they can get some of that wheat out of Odessa and into world markets where it should be. What do we want Turkey to do to try and help with that? Well, Turkey's obviously got a role to play. It's a player in the, in the region and in the Black Sea. Yes, there are discussions there as well. It's a difficult situation because a lot of the rail infrastructure has been damaged through the war. It's been attacked by the Russians. And it's also, as I said, evidence that the Russians are stealing the wheat and actually taking it east. And we just need to make sure that we can try to get that rail infrastructure back so that we can export. But you acknowledge that it's a matter of life and death for some countries. We were in Somaliland last week showing that unless this grain gets there, then people are literally going to starve to death. Well, the really important thing in a situation like this is for the rest of the world to keep their markets open. And that's why Europe, the UK, the US are all absolutely committed to keeping world markets open, because, as I said, there's around 250 million tonnes of wheat in store around the world, and provided world markets remain open, we'll be able to get wheat to some of those North African countries that have been traditionally quite reliant on Ukraine. But it's very important that the world doesn't turn in on itself and put in place export bans. We need those international grain markets to function as intended.
OK. Talk to me about the Northern Ireland Protocol. The first vote on the protocol from MPs later on today. I think we'll get the result this evening. We had the EU ambassador to the UK on Sophie's programme, I think, yesterday, saying the move is illegal and unrealistic and talks of a trade war and retaliation. Is it really worth it?
Well, the reality is that we needed to do something in this space. We've been talking with the European Union now for some time about making the provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol work effectively. The difficulty we've had is that the European Union have said we're not allowed to change our mandate. Member states have said we're not allowed to have an opinion on this. It's reserved to the European Union. And there's been this circular problem with the European Union just refusing to revisit their mandate. And at some point, therefore, you have to take matters into your own hands and to clarify in law what the Northern Ireland Protocol means. And that's what we're doing with this bill. And it's important that we do that because we have some temporary grace periods in place where we're not implementing all of the full checks and not requiring export health certificates and so on. And it's crucial that those remain because, you know, ultimately, Northern Ireland is part of the UK. It's part of our internal market. And you can't have a situation where things like the sale of sausages from GB to Northern Ireland is outlawed, or that seed potatoes from Scotland are not allowed to be sold in Northern Ireland. It's a nonsense, and so we have to address it. What's
changed since we did the deal? You know, if we start breaking deals that we've signed, sealed and delivered, then why would other countries want to do a deal with us?
Well, we're not breaking an agreement. We're bringing clarity to how it should be interpreted. And so the Northern Ireland Protocol always had provisions for what they called the specialised committees to iron out points of detail and to work on those remaining very, very technical issues. So whether a seed potato from Scotland can be authorised to be sold, there's established mechanisms for that. But look, this is the problem. The European Union has refused to even consider that or refer it to their technical committee.
Seeking clarity after the deal's already done, you can't do that.
No, you can, because it was always envisaged.
Well, not according to the EU. They say that it's illegal, unrealistic, and it's going to be a trade war.
Well, that's not correct. What's legal is what Parliament deems legal through the legislation that it passes. Now, obviously, we would still rather that the EU did what they ought to have done many months ago, change their mandate, sort out their position, talk to their own member states about what they should be doing here, and then actually come back to the table and work out how to make that Northern Ireland Protocol work. But in the absence of that, what we will do, and we can absolutely give them this guarantee, we will protect the interests of the EU single market in the way we legislate. So we're talking about having red lanes and green lanes so that goods destined only for Northern Ireland won't need checks, but they will stay in Northern Ireland.
Think about this before?
Goods that are going on to the single market would still have those checks. So that gives the European Union all of the reassurance that they need for their own single market.
I thought this deal was oven ready.
It was a complete deal, but there were remaining technical details, as I said, over often quite banal things like the technical way that you regulate and allow access for things like seed potatoes and particular varieties of tree.
Sure, but
these are small things that were there to be resolved after, and the EU's not resolved.
But do you think that the EU would go into a trade war over banal detail?
No, I don't. I think it would be a very foolish thing for them to do. And
so they obviously think it's more than banal detail.
Well, I think what they need to do is revise their mandate and re-engage in discussions from a meaningful basis, having talked to their own member states. That's what we would like them to do. In the absence of that, obviously it falls to the UK government to determine the correct legal interpretation of the law.
By changing the law?
By by implementing an Act of Parliament that gives us the ability to derogate from elements of it where necessary in order to make it work.
Breaking international law is what the EU say.
Well, we don't accept that because there are circumstances where you can actually do this. And we're talking here not about derogating from the main principles of the Northern Ireland Protocol, that principle that there should be no border on the island of Ireland, that there should be unfettered trade between GB and Northern Ireland, that remains in place. And we will protect the interests of the European Union's own single market by having those red lanes and full checks on those goods. So they've nothing to worry about in that regard. We will look after their interests in the way we legislate through the Northern Ireland.
Do you think the Prime Minister has the full support of his cabinet at the moment?
Yes.
Well, apart from the one that resigned last week.
Of course. And so Oliver Dowden has resigned, and he resigned.
So he was an outlier and there's no others?
Well, he resigned, and the way that collective government works, as you know, is that those who are in the cabinet, yes, we have our full support. We work as a team. We have the support of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has our support. We work together. And, you know, we stick together through difficult times. And so even when, yes, you have very disappointing election results, as we undoubtedly did last Thursday, we've got an important agenda that we're working on, and that's what we're all focused on.
OK. How do we feel about our future kin receiving cash in a suitcase from a Qatari sheikh?
Look, I've seen these reports, you know, and I don't have a particular view on it. Provided this is all accounted for properly, then obviously that's something. It's something for the royal family to look at.
It's going to be reinvestigated by the Charity Commission.
Yes, and obviously there'll be that investigation, and it's something for them to look at. But it's not something, while an investigation's going on, for me to comment on.
Well, he was previously chastised by a High Court judge for calling on the very same sheikh to intervene in the development of Chelsea Barracks. How wise is it, given that that happened and he was chastised by a High Court judge a decade ago, is it to accept bags full of cash?
Look, I don't know the details of this, and I've only seen the news reporting. We don't know how true that news reporting was, or whether there were exaggerations.
They've acknowledged that they received the cash.
Whether he physically took a bag of money. So we don't know any of that, and that's
what if
obviously.
He did?
Well, there's obviously an investigation that the Charity Commission has said they're going to run. Let's let that run its course. OK. Just talk to me before I let you go about suggestions by Nicola Sturgeon, friend of your government, of course, suggesting that if Margaret Thatcher was still in power, there would have been a second Indie referendum by now. Well, I don't think that's right, and I don't think we should have a second referendum now. We had a referendum not long ago, just in 2014. It gave a clear result. And I think the really important thing is there's bigger issues that we need to work on. We've got all of these global pressures as we're coming out of the pandemic. That's what we should be focused on. There's too much else going on in the world at the moment to be having another referendum. OK, it's good to talk to you as always. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you. A quick look at what's happening as far as the papers are concerned. The G7 summit is across many front pages for you this morning. The Eye says leaders are trying to show unity and international matters despite their own domestic political troubles. The Guardian reports how Boris Johnson urged them not to give any ground to Russia on Ukraine. The Times says Boris Johnson and the French President, Emmanuel Macron, are to hold their own summit, find more ways of helping Ukraine militarily. And the Metro reports on how those leaders have been mocking Vladimir Putin. And a picture of Putin on a horse from 2009. Well, as we've been hearing, the Prime Minister will use today's session of the G7 summit in Germany to call for urgent action to help get grain supplies out of Ukraine, with countries across the world suffering from shortages. The Ukrainian president will address G7 leaders via video link, urging them to stand firm against Russia in support of Ukraine. Yesterday, Russia carried out missile attacks on Kiev for the first time in 3 weeks, which President Zelensky says is in response to the G7 meeting.
What are these missiles about today? And what are yesterday's 62 missiles, for only one Saturday, for 24 hours, about? They are about the Russian method, to escalate every time international events take place.
Siobhan standing by for us in Garmisch in Germany for us this morning. Oh, what a fantastic backdrop. Tell us what the plan is today. Thanks for joining us, Siobhan. Tell us more.
Morning, Kate. Well, the star billing today is going to be President Zelensky addressing those leaders. It's going to happen in around an hour and a half's time. And he's going to ask them to give him more support to get missile defence systems, more missile defence systems to try and intercept missiles similar to the ones that have been attacking Ukraine over the weekend. Also saying in his nightly address last night that he needs partners, not observers. So he's going to be putting more pressure on those leaders of the world's 7 richest nations to continue that support. And we are hearing that support for Ukraine here is unanimous. So that will be the first thing. Then later in the day, we're going to have talks surrounding climate change, energy and food security. And that's where we're going to hear Boris Johnson pushing for further solutions to try and get grain out of Ukraine via land routes. Now, we heard from the minister there that they have continued to push the pressure on this. We know that time is really running out. There are 25 million tonnes of grain sitting in silos, potentially rotting, grain that's needed by the rest of the world. And then we've got in July the new harvest, which will compound the problem. So Boris Johnson will be calling for more conscientious work to try and get some of those land routes open, also trying to get Turkey to help get grain out through the Black Sea. It's interesting, though, this isn't a new thing. EU sources were briefing that they were discussing similar situations as well. I think the biggest challenge for Boris Johnson will be the US and Canada, because Boris Johnson also wants food to be put before fuel, and that could be a big problem for the US and biofuels.
Indeed so, Fanai. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you, we'll speak to retired British Army officer General Richard Barrons as world leaders meet for the second day of the G7 summit. As hundreds of British Airways staff vote to strike next month in a row over pay, we'll speak to a member of the GB union about the possible impact on our holidays. Barristers are to strike this morning, added to the industrial unrest in the country. The Criminal Bar Association is pushing for a 25% increase in criminal legal aid rates. The CBA says junior barristers make an average annual income after expenses of £12,200 in the first 3 years of practice. The government is suggesting a 15% pay increase for barristers, meaning a typical criminal barrister earning around £7,000 extra per year. The number of firms holding a criminal legal aid contract has fallen from just over 1,600 to just over 1,000 in the last 6 years. Aisha standing by for us at the Old Bailey. So the strike starts at what, 10 o'clock this morning?
Yeah, that's right. They're planning to protest here and at Crown Courts around England and Wales. It's going to be more than 2,000 criminal barristers walking out over the course of today and tomorrow. And all of this comes down to disputes over legal aid funding. Now, an independent review recommended that the government increase legal aid funding by 15%, but barristers are saying that's not enough and it should be at least 25% to prevent an exodus of criminal barristers from the criminal justice system. And to give you an example of staff shortages at the moment, over the last 5 years, more than a quarter of specialist criminal barristers have left the profession. So it really does come down to not only pay, but the staff shortages alongside that as well. So these strikes will see barristers refusing to take up new cases, barristers refusing return work, which is essentially when they cover for colleagues who are overrunning in other cases. And it may well prevent court cases from taking place, so more postponements there.
OK, thank you. Now, BT workers will vote this week over potential strike action over pay, while 115,000 postal workers will also receive ballot papers. Dave Ward, the head of the Communication Workers Union, says the two companies jointly made £2 billion profit last year, and he said enough is enough. And the NHS is to offer faster treatment to patients who can travel to different parts of the country, part of a plan to try to eliminate the number of people who've been waiting for 2 years or longer to get treatment. Here's Becky Cottrell.
Debilitating pain has dominated Francis Wakefield's life for years after a car accident. But now he's in even more agony because of complications following eye surgery.
I don't know which is worse, the headaches or the physical pains. I had cataracts done a few years back. Since having the cataract surgery and the implants put in the eye, I've suffered with triple vision. And for over the last 3 years, and it is over the last 3 years, I'm still waiting to go back to have it corrected.
While Francis waits, his distorted vision is causing daily migraines. It's excruciating, and there are far too many others with stories like his. The latest NHS figures showed almost 6.5 million people are waiting for treatment. That's a record and a massive increase on 4.4 million people before the pandemic. So to tackle the backlog, patients waiting 2 years or more can now go to another part of the country where they can be treated sooner. The cost of travel and accommodation will be covered, but for Francis, a long car journey could mean unbearable pain.
That would be a nightmare for me. And I wouldn't be able to just go straight there and come straight back. Sorry.
But in the medical community, there is cautious optimism.
I think we shouldn't be too concerned about patients being offered care out of area, as long as that there's provisions for people, say, for example, who go for knees and hip operations, to have follow-up care locally if needed.
The NHS says it's on track to treat all those waiting 2 years or more by the end of next month. But they'll need patients willing and able to travel potentially hundreds of miles away from home for this plan to work. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Lancashire.
Now, for the first time in 3 years, there are queues for Wimbledon and players will play all their matches in front of packed stands. Great news, isn't it? Jackie's there for us. Hey, Jackie, morning.
Good morning, Kay. You're probably wondering why I'm not in a tent. Let me just explain how it all works. So, the queuers in tents have to pack them up very, very early, and they move them, and I am not joking, by about 6 o'clock they're all packed away, ready to go, and then they move the queue on up towards the club. But I've got a few stragglers for you who couldn't be bothered to camp, could you girls? But you've come out quite early this morning. What are you hoping to see?
Yes, come to see Murray and Raducanu, hopefully get up onto the hill, support them from there.
Yeah, with a couple of bottles of alcohol. Yeah. But you play a little bit, don't you? So you're sort of into it. What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so we play a little bit, meet up around the courts of London every now and again. But I've never been in Wimbledon before, but I live quite close by, so just excited to get in the grounds and see what it's like on the inside.
Yes, it's a rite of passage. Shame on you not coming before. And you're a bit of an expert, aren't you? But you do know what's going on. Who have you come to watch? Because clearly you're not going to get onto centre court or court one, because you're far too late for that.
I know, we weren't committed enough. I'm looking forward to watching Peniston play. I think he's done really well. No one heard of him until Queen's, and he got to semi-finals, and I love an underdog. So, supporting him, and he's court 3, so hopefully we'll be able to get onto the court and watch him play.
Yeah, and he's super excited. I saw him yesterday. We actually did a little feature on him, Kay, and he cannot believe he's got a wild card into Wimbledon, and he is one of the form grass court players of the entire season, and he's still all quite excited and thrilled by it all. So that is a really good choice.
Come on, Peniston.
Come on, Ryan Peniston. Who have you come to see?
As with the others, just really excited to get in and see whatever we can, basically.
And have a few strawberries and cream, because that's literally the only affordable thing on the menu.
Definitely looking forward to strawberries and cream.
Which are coming this year in a recyclable cardboard box with a strawberry on the front. So it's actually, they've gone all out green at Wimbledon this year. So don't leave them too long, because they will fall through the bottom. And what have you come to see?
I'm not going to lie, I'm mostly here for the Pims. These guys, they're going to do me a quick 101 on rules of tennis before we go in. Yeah. I'm here for the day out, really.
Yeah, after you've drunk a whole jug of Pims. Well, that sounds like a plan to me. A great day on centre court. That is a ticket to have. These guys don't have it, but that is Djokovic, Raducanu and Murray. But in total, 9 Brits in action. So you're all good, girls. You'll find somebody to watch. Yeah.
Quick look at the weather for you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Low pressure continues to dominate our weather this week, which means more breezy and showery conditions with some drier and brighter interludes. There will be plenty of showers around this morning, although eastern England and much of Ireland will be brighter and not as windy as Sunday. Overall, it's set to be a mix of sunny spells and scattered showers. The showers will move eastwards through the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Looking now at some of the images that have caught our eye in the papers for you this morning. Does the pink suit or the lack of female representation stand out more in this photo? Which one is it? President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stands as the only female in this image in the Guardian of G7 leaders, right at the end as well. Pictures from Freya for you this morning. A funny caption here in the Telegraph saying, Tigger warning. These lucky tourists got to see some Bengali tigers in action in India, squaring up to each other. And you might have seen this pop in pictures over the weekend. Mr. Happy Face is in the Times this morning, voted the ugliest dog in the world. I think that's unkind. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And take a look at this in the Express, an underwater shot of some synchronised swimmers. Almost looks like a painting, doesn't it? Amazing. Coming up, we'll be speaking to General Richard Barrons, the former commander of Joint Forces Command, about what the G7 leaders could achieve during their meeting in Germany. That's coming. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News Monday morning. The Environment Secretary, George Eustice, says that Boris Johnson has the full support of the Cabinet. Following the losses in the two by-elections last week, the party chair, Oliver Dowden, resigned, saying somebody needed to take responsibility. But Mr Eustice said the Cabinet is behind the Prime Minister. Do you think the Prime Minister has the full support of his Cabinet at the moment?
Yes.
Well, apart from the one that resigned last week.
Of course. And so Oliver Dowden has resigned, and he resigned.
So he was an outlier and there's no others?
Well, he resigned, and the way that collective government works, as you know, is that those who are in the Cabinet, yes, we have our full support. We work as a team. We have the support of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has our support. We work together. And, you know, we stick together through difficult times. And so even when, yes, you have very disappointing election results, as we undoubtedly did last Thursday, we got an important agenda that we're working on, and that's what we're all focused on.
Full support.
Full support. Yes, certainly the message from the travelling PM's team is that while it's not great, as one Downing Street figure put it to me, that they lost two by-elections, this is mid-term, they lost a member of the Cabinet who they are saying took responsibility for those by-elections, and the message seems to be full steam ahead, even talking about the Prime Minister serving a third term. Some saying, oh, maybe it was a flippant remark, but he certainly spent some time discussing the idea of going on and on. And I think some in his party who were back here in London watching him on the world stage think that he's out of touch with the party mood. It was only a couple of weeks ago that the Prime Minister had a vote of confidence in his leadership, which he won without a very resounding win, 40% of his MPs voting against him. And I think him talking now about having a third term when most of his MPs have made clear they don't want him to finish his first, let alone have a second, is only going to really entrench the discontent here. We've got a couple of international rows on the horizon as well. We've got the Northern Ireland laws that the government has drafted, having their first vote in Parliament today. This is to essentially override the Brexit deal that the government signed, and those trade arrangements in Northern Ireland. The government say they don't work, that they threaten peace and stability in Northern Ireland. But the EU say if this goes ahead, if this move by the UK government goes ahead, it will be breaking international law and they may be trade retaliation. So we'll see if any Conservatives take a stand on that today. Boris Johnson's also got an initiative at the G7, which the Americans are already opposing, which is to try and have less land for sort of green fuels, to try and increase the amount, to try and reduce the prices of food on international markets. But it sounds like he may not succeed with that either.
I'm intrigued by the third term thing. Does he think that this is his second term? As in, he did one term already and then he went to the polls quite quickly? Or does he really think that he's going in towards the end of the 2020s?
So, as I understand it, Boris Johnson was asked about his longevity, a question that no Prime Minister can answer. You can never say, yes, I am going to carry on forever, or you look arrogant, and then as soon as you talk about leaving, as Tony Blair found in 2007, you become a lame duck, or David Cameron when he talked about it like blocks of Weetabix, 2's enough and 3's too many. As soon as you talk about your departure, suddenly it becomes almost inevitable and no one can talk about anything else. So I think to try and head that off, Boris Johnson said, oh, I'm thinking about my third term, which would take us into the early 2030s. That suggests that he thinks this is his first term.
Right.
Now, speaking to some of his team, they say, look, it was a flippant remark. It was a joke because, of course, you can never answer that question. Someone in his team said it's like the, when did you stop beating your wife question? You cannot answer it in a successful way. But certainly a member of his cabinet, Brandon Lewis, when asked about it yesterday, said the Prime Minister has got a long-term agenda. I'm told that the reason he said it is because he wants to show that, for example, levelling up, which is going to take a very long time, is something he's committed to in the long term. He wants to make sure that areas of the country that have been left behind can start improving, and that is going to be a long-term thing that he's committed to. So the idea he's not going to kind of run away from office, but I think certainly to MPs back here who are still trying quite actively to get rid of the Prime Minister, it has not come as a very welcome message.
OK. Tamara Fanai, thanks so much indeed. Talked about the war in Ukraine with the Minister as well. It's going to be top of the agenda at day 2 of the G7 meeting in Germany. Ukraine's president will address summit leaders, urging them to stand firm against Russia. Speaking to us now is a retired British Army officer and former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command, General Richard Barrons. Hello to you, General. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. What do you think should be top of the agenda with the G7 in relation to Ukraine?
So I think they've got 3 things they're going to have to talk about. The first is the pressing need to get enough equipment and ammunition and support into the east of Ukraine to try and stem this brutal but steady Russian advance. I think the second thing is to resolve amongst themselves that we are all, and that means every citizen in the West, going to have to bear our own personal costs for this war in our own interests. And the third will be to have a conversation about how to get the grain out of Ukraine to feed several hundred million people around the world who are also victims of this war.
Did put that to the Minister. He says it's too dangerous to try to bring it out via the sea.
Well, it is dangerous and impossible to do, actually, without an agreement that includes the Russians in order to demine the access to the ports and for commercial shippings to go in at a reasonable insurance bill and move the stuff out. But unless something like that can be brokered, then several hundred million people are going to starve. So,
in your opinion, how do we get it out by land, and what role do you think Turkey should play?
So getting out by land is happening, but as a rule of thumb, it takes about 2 years to get 1 year's crop out of Ukraine if you're using road and rail. So there really isn't an effective alternative to the sea. And any route through the sea requires the Russian Black Sea Fleet to cooperate or at least back off. It requires Turkey to have a big role in providing secure access through the Bosphorus Straits, and it requires commercial companies that are willing to go and pick the stuff up.
Seems like the war is very much heading in Russia's favour at the moment, doesn't it?
Well, I think in the short term that is so. Russia will feel it's sitting on now just a bit less than a quarter of Ukraine. It knows that Ukraine does not have the military capability to throw them out, and it will sense that there is some weariness in the world at bearing the consequences of this war. But we should absolutely recognise Russia, if it thinks strategically, knows that it will lose this war. It's being isolated from the international community. It's a pariah state. Its economy will shrink by maybe 15% this year. And if Ukraine is enabled to re-equip and rearm, then Ukraine will reverse the military tide in due course and start to throw the Russians out. And so for Russia, probably timing is everything here.
How worrying is the growing number of people joining the International Legion of Foreign Fighters?
So we should expect that many people around the world feel the need to go and fight for Ukraine. If they fight as part of the Ukrainian armed forces, in a way, I suppose, similar to the International Brigade in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, so if they're formally part of Ukrainian armed forces, then they should be covered by the Geneva Convention. What isn't going to work is private venture soldiering, people going to have a go as mercenaries or on their own ticket. That's not helpful at all.
No. Talk to me about Severodonetsk and why it is important for Russia that they have now fully claimed that area.
It matters because it's a tangible victory. It's been a long and slow and grinding and brutal, and in many ways, from a Russian perspective, very incompetent battle, but they are going to take this city. So they'll use it as a way marker in the way they try to say the success is coming their way. But the next town, just a few miles away on the other side of the river, Lysychansk, is on higher ground. It too will be a stiff fight. So the Russians should in no way think they're going to advance further into the Donbass without paying a really heavy price in terms of the young people that they lose and the equipment that gets destroyed. And they'll know that their capacity to take all of the Donbass is going to be limited just because of the quality of the Ukrainian resistance.
Diplomacy always important in war, as well as fighting to try to get the upper hand. When we're talking about the land that has already been seized by Russia, they could see that as the new border with Ukraine, if you like. The Ukrainians have said, absolutely not, and we will continue until we get all of the Donbass and Donetsk region back in our control. There has to be a middle ground, doesn't there?
Well, I think it's very hard for Ukraine to talk about middle ground in the middle of the war, and impossible for the West to do anything, frankly, but to support the Ukrainian ambition to take their country back. Because otherwise, how do we know that if there were, say, a pause, that Russia wouldn't come back for more in Ukraine next year, or try it somewhere else in the world, or even perhaps just try and nibble away at the edges of NATO, though the consequences would be enormous. We should absolutely expect Russia at some point, I would guess, late summer, autumn this year, to announce that it's stopped, at least for now. It will hold referenda in these areas, which of course will be false, to provide the political cover for what will be effectively annexation of parts of Ukraine into the Russian Federation, and they'll then sit them behind the Russian nuclear umbrella. And when that happens, we will have seen Russia essentially, in an act of sheer imperialism, take out about a quarter of somebody else's country. And no one in the West should think that's in our interest to put up with it. So we'll then see the conflict settle down, not, I think, into a stalemate, but into a long, grinding conflict with a front line of about 1,000 miles.
And in the meantime, lobbing bombs at the capital for the first time in 3 weeks. One is guessing that is as a direct result of the G7 meeting.
Yes, it's happened before. So if there's a big international meeting, Russia shows that it has the weapons that can target anywhere in Ukraine, and really that's not new. And the weapons fired yesterday were probably targeting a weapons factory, but they were done from such a long range, probably from the Caspian Sea, that the weapons were not accurate enough, and they hit a residential area as well. So this is a sign of Russians' reach into Ukraine, not new, but also a sign of its weakness. And it was a very poorly conducted strike.
Good to talk to you as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Going to be hearing from the Prime Minister again later on today. He is at the G7 meeting, as we said, in Germany. Siobhan standing by for us for the very latest on that in the next hour. But before that, if you thought WAGs were a purely football thing, well, you might be wrong. Look behind the scenes at the G7 and a curiously old-fashioned outing for the partners of the world leaders. Carrie Johnson and the French First Lady, Brigitte Macron, were among the wives taking a stroll with walking poles through the Bavarian countryside, accompanied by former professional skiers. And I'm sure that, there you go, one of them's carrying a baby as well. How cool is that? I'm not sure which lady she is, but I'll find out for the next hour for you. Cool. Now, around 700 British Airways staff at Heathrow Airport have voted for industrial action next month in a row over pay, and it could mean more summer travel chaos. Joining us now is the National Officer at the GMB Union, Nadine Horton. Hello to you, Ms Horton. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What's the problem? What's the issue?
Our members are asking for their pay to be returned to pre-pandemic levels. During the pandemic, British Airways very opportunistically used something called fire and rehire to force our members into accepting a 10% pay cut. And these are some of the lowest paid workers in the airline. And all they want is to have that 10% pay cut reinstated. They want to help British Airways get back to pre-pandemic profitability. And they think that the best way to do that is to invest in their staff to ensure that recruitment and retention is in place. And our members have been experiencing extremely high levels of verbal and, unfortunately, in some cases, physical abuse, which has been brought about by the lack of preparation for the reopening of the industry. And it's really on the back end of receiving this abuse and the frustration that they're experiencing that they've had enough. And they've been asking nicely now for over a year for British Airways to reinstate this 10% pay cut, and BA just aren't listening.
So tell me more about some of this physical abuse that your members have been at the sharp end of.
They've had to be escorted out of the airport by police. They've experienced homophobic abuse. They have been spat at. I had one woman, this wasn't at Heathrow, but at Birmingham Airport, where the CEO has just been awarded a 50% pay increase. A ticket agent, passenger service agent, working for one of the largest ground handling companies in the country, was pulled over the ticket desk by a male passenger out of his frustration, and her colleagues had to assist her.
So, just to clarify, in Birmingham, somebody dragged one of your members over the ticket desk?
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. What happened?
Well, her colleagues thankfully sort of managed to pull her back. And these workers, they're not on much more than the minimum wage, Kay. And they love working for the aviation industry. They've done it for many, many years. They want the industry to get back on its knees, and they want to help families to start flying again. But how can they do that when they're being treated like this?
Given that we know that the government is against fire and rehire, given what happened with P&O, and they stepped in there saying that it was completely against the government's opinion and position, what's Grant Shapps doing to support your union?
Well, very little, Kay. I don't accept that this government is against fire and rehire. Hugh Merriman was very outspoken about it during the British Airways attack on our members. To suggest that the government is against fire and rehire, but to then make it harder for workers to try to fight back and win back what they had taken from them as a result of fire and rehire during the pandemic doesn't really stack up for me.
Do you acknowledge, or to what extent do you acknowledge, that if your members do go on strike, they're going to cause absolute chaos for travellers who just want to get away on holiday with the kids?
The point of a strike is obviously to organise it at a time when it is going to be most effective and most disruptive. Our members have had to jump through anti-trade union laws to get to the point of even being able to hold a democratic industrial action ballot that they voted in. And our members don't do this lightly, and you will have heard it been said many times before, the strike is a last resort. And as I said at the start, we've been asking for British Airways to reinstate this pay cut for well over a year now. And where we've ended up is our members feeling that they're not being listened to. And so they've had to take matters into their own hands and use the power that they have available to them through a democratic, legal, industrial action ballot. And yes, it will cause disruption. And yes, my members and I are genuinely sorry for any disruption that is going to cause to hardworking families who so desperately want to get away after not being able to fly as a result of the pandemic. But what our members are doing here is defending their living standards. They just want to be able to have a decent standard of living. They are primarily women, many of them part-time. I've spoken about the verbal and physical abuse that they face. They've got families to look after as well. And this isn't just about them being able to have a holiday. This is about them being able to put food on the table.
Coordinated strike action is something that's been suggested by the RMT union. Is that something that your union would support?
We're not having behind closed doors discussions about coordinating industrial action. When industrial action happens, it happens organically. It happens when working people have had enough and they've decided that they need to use the power that they have available to them to withdraw their labour. If there is an opportunity to coordinate industrial action, and look, disputes don't run on a linear line. You know, there's lots of ups and downs, and there's bumps in the road, and there's negotiations to be had, and there's decisions to be had about when it's the appropriate time to organise industrial action. But if coordinated industrial action is the right course of action, and that is what is decided by our reps and our members, because they're the ones that call the shots in this process. We're a democratic organisation, and it's our reps and members that make these decisions. If that is the right course of action, then I don't see any reason why we wouldn't.
So you would support a summer of discontent?
No, it's not about supporting a summer of discontent, Kate. It's about working people having had enough. It's about the fact that the CEO of British Airways gets paid £848,000 and the CEO of IAG, the parent company of British Airways, gets paid £4.9 million. It's about the fact that British Airways paid £1.6 billion in dividends out to shareholders when it was profitable prior to the pandemic, instead of reinvesting that money into its staff and into things like IT systems to make sure that the airline is able to function properly. It's about the fact that working people have seen the sharpest decline in their living standards in 2 decades. And it's about the fact that working people have had enough, and actually that they see that there is some hope in standing together collectively and organising. And if this is the spark that lights the flame, that leads to working...
interrupt you there. Do forgive me. Come back and talk to us next week or whenever you'd like to. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you.